Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. Joining us today is Mandy Wiener. Mandy, great to have you. Been ages since I've seen you. Wonderful to have you back sitting with you.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And the reason I got you in here is you're a prolific writer. Goodness, I don't know where you get the time from. We were just talking about it, but you have written some wonderful books, and your latest book has just come out, Whistleblowers.
Yeah, it's an updated version of a book that came out in 2020, but we felt like we needed to update it. So it includes a chapter on Babita Deokaran, the Gauteng health official who was killed. And it's got a new introduction, a new conclusion, because there's been a lot of developments in the whistleblowing scene in South Africa over the past 3 years or so. So, yeah, it is pretty much a new book.
Because I've got to imagine that South Africa needs its whistleblowers. My word, with the kind of issues that we have in South Africa, we would be dead if we didn't have whistleblowers.
And we saw that during the State Capture Commission. We saw how important and what a huge contribution whistleblowers play in fighting corruption in South Africa. It's not a new thing. I write about some whistleblowers that were killed in the run-up to the 2010 Soccer World Cup. I speak about other whistleblowers in some municipalities who've exposed corruption. So it's not a new thing. But I think what we've seen because of the State Capture Commission is the rise of the whistleblower in South Africa. It is very much a golden age of whistleblowing, but I think what that has also brought into stark relief is the necessity to protect and reward and encourage and entice whistleblowers to come forward.
But it's probably a fool's errand, isn't it? Because you're hardly likely, I would imagine, to get buy-in from the state, because the state are the people invariably behind a lot of the graft.
Well, it depends how cynical you are. So at the State Capture...
The answer's very...
Yes, I'm sure. So at the State Capture Commission, we had the President come and speak about how important whistleblowers are, how they need to be protected, how he wants to see a change in legislation to protect and encourage and reward whistleblowers. Zondo himself made recommendations about what needs to happen in the country. Nothing has actually happened. So the Justice Ministry says that they are working on a draft legislation which is going to review completely how whistleblowers are treated and what the legislation looks like. But that has not happened. And if you are very cynical like yourself, Mike, then yes, I think that some people would argue that they don't want to protect whistleblowers because of the fact that the state is so complicit, that the ANC is so complicit in so much of the corruption.
So if you immediately go to the position that I'm very cynical, does that mean that you are less cynical?
I'm always less cynical.
And does that mean that you think that whistleblowers are being given a decent deal in South Africa?
No. But that means no. So I'm a journalist, so I'm inherently cynical, right? That goes without saying. But I am still optimistic because I think that we need to have a different perspective. I think that we need to, the very fact that whistleblowers are still coming forward, and you still have really good people who are willing to not look the other way, who are willing to speak up and push back. And we saw a lot of these people at the State Capture Commission. So from Babita Deokaran to Ethel Williams, to Musilo Motepo, to Bianca Goodson and Themba Maseko. So many of these people went to the Zondo Commission. And if it wasn't for them, we would still be very much in the midst of state capture in South Africa. The Guptas would still be carrying on. The Gupta leaks came out because of whistleblowers. So you have to appreciate the contribution made by whistleblowers and by very good people in this country who don't believe it's a fool's errand, who believe that they have a responsibility. They're either patriots or they're just highly ethical individuals.
Some of the names you mentioned only became whistleblowers when they had no option, the cynic amongst us may say. Babita Deokaran took 6 months to suddenly get ethical, so I'm not sure whether that counts so much as whistleblowing. I mean, the question is Andre de Ruyter a whistleblower?
I'm not sure that Andre de Ruyter is a whistleblower in the true sense of being a whistleblower. I think that he was an executive who who had a job to do. I'm not sure that that qualifies as whistleblowing. So the definition of whistleblowing is somebody who does have knowledge and makes it public. There's a broader definition. I like to think that there is a spectrum of whistleblowers. Not everybody agrees with me on this. And I think that on one end of the spectrum, you've got people who are altruistic in their motives, who absolutely will not do anything wrong. It is black or white. And there are a lot of good people that we've seen who've been like this, who've just said, absolutely no, not on my watch. Somewhere in the middle, you've got an accidental whistleblower, somebody who could go either way. They have the opportunity to get involved in corruption, and they mull it over, and ultimately they decide they have no choice, but they've got to come clean. On the far end, you've got people who have got proximity to wrongdoing, like in the sense that they are involved. They are very much involved in the crime. They have benefited from the crime, and in order to save themselves, they've got to blow the whistle. And there are a number of people who are like that. I think that they remain whistleblowers. I think they're still whistleblowers, even though their motives may be wrong.
So I presume the poster child for that would be Angelo Agrizzi.
On his own admission.
Yeah.
And on his own admission, he says that he is a whistleblower. He was involved. He's got all the black books to prove it. He's got the video footage. And he was going to go down. And he decided that he had to go public.
But yet he's the one that the state has gone after with the most vigor out of the whole state capture.
And that's his argument. He's saying, why are they going after me? He believes that there was an attempt on his life, that he has been so ill as a result. And that's the argument from Angelo Agrizzi, is if I was cooperating, why are you going after me with such vigor?
Did you interview him?
Yes, for the book I did, yeah.
And how does he feel? Because, I mean, he must feel, in a way, a little bit let down by the process. The fact that, as I said, they went after him with such enthusiasm.
Well,
but
he
none of the people that he
very much believes that he is a whistleblower. And he believes that he gave the state evidence and that the state has turned on him. You have to read the whole book.
Yes.
To see what he says.
Yes, you did right.
Yeah.
And so must everybody else. So please buy Mandy's book and learn about all these whistleblowers. Now, you mentioned Babita Deokaran. She paid the ultimate price. Yeah. And that must be the absolute fear of anybody. I mean, she wasn't necessarily a whistleblower. She was doing her job.
Mm. Yeah, so this is the thing about Babita Deokaran, is that she was on the coalface. Yeah. She was a senior finance official at the Gauteng Health Department. She had realized that there was something dodgy going on at Tembisa Hospital. There were very dubious payments being made, and she noticed a pattern of payments. And she noticed that there were an extreme amount of invoices that were coming in for Tembisa Hospital, and that they were being paid to very suspicious companies that were eventing companies or had no background in healthcare. And she started doing some investigating into this, and she picked up that there may have been some kind of extraction network that was targeting Tembisa Hospital. She put the brakes on the payments. And we're talking here about payments just under 500,000 Rand, because then they don't need to go through tender processes. The CEO can sign them off. And she put the brakes on these payments, and she realized that her life may be in danger. She went to the acting CFO of the Gauteng Health Department and raised the alarm, saying our lives may be in danger, that she was concerned. So she went to her bosses. She compiled a forensic report and said there needed to be an investigation. They didn't listen to her. They ignored her. And for that, she was gunned down in her driveway after dropping her teenage daughter at school. And that is extremely worrying, because it will have a chilling effect on other people. So while she wasn't technically a whistleblower, she was a good civil servant that was pushing back against corruption. But she was a whistleblower in the sense that she had gone to her bosses and said, here's the problem. This is what we need to be worried about. We need to do something about this. And they did nothing. And for that, she was killed. Mm. And that is terrifying. And I do hope that her death will not be in vain, that the killing of Babita Deokaran has really raised the spectre of whistleblowing in South Africa. And I hope that it will be a catalyst for some kind of real transformation transformation and change.
Yeah, I suppose the biggest commentary could be that all of her seniors remained in their positions for years afterwards.
Yeah, so it took Jeff Wicks, the investigative reporter at News 24, to really put pressure on, because Jeff was able to investigate where law enforcement failed. And because of his reporting and because of other whistleblowers who came forward, Jeff was able to fully reveal what it was that Babita Deokaran had stumbled upon. And we have seen the extent of this very politically connected extraction network at Tembisa Hospital, where 500,000 rand was spent on skinny jeans, size 6 to 7 for girls, and 100,000 rand on wingback leather chairs, 10,000 rand on a plastic bucket, that kind of stuff. And it's because of that we were able to see why Babita Deokaran was killed. And there's been so much pressure coming from the News 24 reporting that we have now seen some action. So there's an SIU investigation. Ashley Mtunzi, who was the acting CEO, I understand, has been charged. Lerato Mario, who was the acting CFO, has been put on suspension. But we still have not really seen whoever ordered Babita Deokaran's death being held accountable. The shooters have been arrested. That trial is dragging. But the people ultimately responsible, nowhere near a courtroom.
Now, Mandy, you've put yourself in some interesting positions. I know we did an event years ago, just after you wrote your book, Killing Kebble, which at the time was the hottest property, and it was the big story, and you had spoken to all these very dubious characters, and you assured us that you never felt threatened. What do you make of the fact that law enforcement seems to be the one body in this whole desperately terrible saga, seems to almost, to say they do nothing is to be too kind. They just seem to throw the file away.
So firstly, I think that a caveat is important here. I don't think that law enforcement in its entirety is useless. I think there's this narrative in South Africa where people just go, oh, the police are rubbish, the prosecutors aren't doing their jobs properly. For me, that is just not true. Because I think there are excellent police officers who are doing a really good job. There are excellent prosecutors. You have to remember that the police, the Hawks, the NPA were key sites of state capture. The NPA was eviscerated. It lost half of its capacity. Crime intelligence was completely rudderless. There was so much infighting and political shenanigans going on. So I think you need to understand the extent to which these various institutions were hollowed out. And I think that there's been a rebuilding process that has had to take place. I think it's unfair to say that the cops do nothing. People are convicted in this country every day. The wheels of justice turn. They turn slowly, but they do turn. There is no anarchy. We are not a failed state. We are still a functioning democracy. But I understand people's frustration because they want to see convictions. And they specifically want to see state capture convictions. And Shamila Batoy has been very clear about this, that the NPA will be judged by whether or not it can convict the state capture perpetrators. Yeah. And I think that's why people just assume that there is a failure. But it's a process and it takes time. Because
the wheels of justice seem to turn only for those, not when the state is involved. They turn only for people that seem to be involved in crime that doesn't include taking money from the state.
Well, the NPA would argue, and they have argued, that we've seen several seminal state capture cases being enrolled. So towards the second half of last year, there were 9 seminal matters that were enrolled. So from Brian Molefe, Anuj Singh, the Transnet accused, Ace Magashule, the Tongaat Hewlett accused. There are a number of cases where we have seen people being charged. What people want to see is convictions. That's the issue. And then we've had 2 major setbacks this year. So the fact that the Guptas have not been extradited, and that's collapsed, and the Nulani fraud case in the Free State has also collapsed. I think that has been an indicator for the public that the NPA is failing. And the NPA has addressed this by saying that what it actually needs more than anything is support. And these two failures should really address and highlight the fact that the NPA needs more capacity and needs more support rather than criticism.
Do you think, and I'll try it anyway because I think I know the answer. Do you think that the NPA is throwing these cases?
No, definitely not. No,
Because it seems like it, because they don't even make it to trial. They get the paperwork wrong.
No, that's not true at all. So the Nulani case went to trial. There was a 174 application, so there was a dismissal before the defence had to bring its case. And I think that case also. My understanding is that Andrea Johnson, who's the head of the investigating directorate, came in at a point in that case where it had already been taken to court, and I think that they went entirely satisfied with it. So I think it's a hard trial to gauge just how effective the investigating directorate could be. I think that the determination and the commitment from the NPA and from the investigating directorates is not in doubt. I've known Andrea Johnson for a very long time. I saw her convict Jackie Salibi. I saw her convict Oscar Pistorius. And I think that no one wants to mess with her. I think that if she's there, I've got confidence in the system. I think what is more important than anything else is that the investigating directorate, the president had made a commitment that it would be made permanent and it would be given tenure and it would be given investigative powers. That legislation has still not really come into effect. And I think the only way for the ID to truly be effective is for that to happen with more urgency. Because then, in a way, it would mean that the Scorpions are back, but not entirely. I think that would give the public more confidence as well.
Yeah, it seems like the only thing that's going to lead to successful prosecutions is a change of government, one would imagine, because it doesn't look like with the cover from above, it doesn't look like, certainly in the state capture cases, that these cases are ever going to make it to a successful trial. Certainly not the high-profile one.
I think there is cover from above in the sense that the Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, I think is providing cover from above.
For who?
For the NPA. Without being politically interfering, of course, but I think that he has certainly said the right things when it comes to the NPA. He has confidence in Shamila Batoy. But I think there's also this narrative, which clearly you subscribe to, that is a cynical one that assumes that the state is failing. I think that it's more nuanced and more complex than that.
All I see is behind you a ton of books written about all of these crimes and very few people serving time for them. That I do see in a country that desperately needs to rack up a few examples just to dissuade the rest, because here we sit in darkness for half the day. Let's not forget about that. And that's because of crime, isn't it?
I think it's because of crime and corruption. I think that what we saw at Eskom certainly has been because of self-enrichment. The entity was plundered during the state capture era. And that's why
a few low-level people have been held to account.
Yeah. So I think that we need to see people like Machela Koko and Anoj Singh and Brian Molefe, those prosecutions being turned into convictions.
So pardon me if I don't end my subscription to that particular thought that the government has no intention of taking this forward. In the book, what are some of the laws that need to be, some of the protections and rewards even that whistleblowers need to have?
There are options. And according to the Justice Department, they have gone around the world looking at international best practice. So in the States, for example, there is the False Claims Act, where whistleblowers will get between 10 and 30% of a successful whistleblowing claim. That means that some of the whistleblowers from state capture could have been paid millions. Instead, they are having to start back-a-buddy campaigns and are unemployed and unemployable and completely broke from being dragged through the courts. So that's one of the options, that they could be financially remunerated. There could be a Chapter 9 organization, like a whistleblower house, that follows the Dutch model, where it's one entity where the whistleblower can go to get legal and psychological and physical protection. So that's something that perhaps is an option. There are various different incarnations of laws that we could be looking at. But as things stand at the moment, the Protected Disclosures Act, the PDA, which is the main law in South Africa, which is supposed to protect whistleblowers, is ineffective. It is very much a labor law type act, and it just doesn't provide the necessary protection.
So, Mandy, let's move to the other part of your day job when you're not writing these wonderful books about really dodgy people doing terrible things. You've been very involved. I mean, you do the midday report on 702, which is a recap of the day's news and interviews and things like that. Given that I fall into the cynic category, I presume that you are feeling less cynical about South Africa.
So, Mike, my job every day is to tell people how bad everything is. Literally. That's my job. Is I go on radio for an hour every day, and by virtue of the nature of what journalism is, there is a tendency towards the negative. We highlight more negative than positive. So we speak about corruption, and we speak about crime and wrongdoing, and we hold politicians to account. But I also believe that there is a responsibility on the media to be balanced and to provide light and shade. So I'm very conscious of that, where I try and also focus on some of the lighter stories. And there are incredible stories to tell in this country. I see the very worst of it, but we see the very best of it as well. And there are incredible stories to tell about just good South Africans doing wonderful things. So I also do a lot of corporate speaking. I do a lot of speaking at conferences where I speak about what I like to call the hope dealers. And these are patriots. These are good South Africans. These are people who are changing the narrative in their own way. So they might be whistleblowers. They might be investigative journalists. They could be good civil servants. It is the judiciary. It is could be the former public protector, or just people who are doing their jobs properly and pushing back against corruption. Pravin Gordhan said earlier this year that there is a fight raging in South Africa between those who want to enrich themselves and those who want the country to thrive. And there are great people in this country who are pushing back, who are fighting for the country. Look, I also have a really good handle on the reality because that is my job every day. And I can give a good dose of reality and how terrible things are. But I think we need perspective, and we need to have balance as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got to say, as cynical as I may appear, I actually see those possibilities in South Africa. I see a lot of things happening in South Africa which are very, very positive. I mean, for example, we have got, without question, the most ravenously capitalist country in the history of the world, where everything has been privatized. I mean, absolutely everything. Right? I mean, South Africa is a free marketeer's wet dream. There's no doubt about it. Because
well, in the failure of the state, we've seen the rise of the private sector.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Much so.
And I find it quite astounding, because now what you're seeing is the privatization of government. Yeah. Not just some of their functions, but the government itself. If you look at our president, he privatizes everything that he does. So he no longer goes to his cabinet ministers to do anything. He will get a retired judge to do it, right? Like he wants to do with...
He'll appoint a red tape cutter.
He'll appoint a red tape cutter who doesn't seem to cut any red tape. And he will get somebody else to do what there is a minister appointed to do. Yeah. So everybody is working outside of the state, which is wonderful, but for the 40% tax that we're paying.
There is great opportunity in crisis. So I do think that there is potential there. I also feel very strongly about public-private partnerships. Imtiaz Suleiman from The Gift of the Givers always says you can't leave it to 7 million taxpayers to be responsible for 60 million South Africans either. So I understand your frustration at being one of those 7 million taxpayers who is responsible for the 60 million. But I think we also need to see active citizenship, but we need to see the private sector getting more involved with helping the public sector to develop. And I think there are great examples of that, where we've seen this cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. Not everybody loves this idea. I'm not sure you're a fan, because you look very unhappy about this at the moment. But I think that if we leave it to government and take a hands-off approach, then it's not going to work either. But truthfully, if you're not happy with it, then vote and vote another government in.
Yes. Just you saw the look on my face when you were talking about this public-private partnership. I think it has its limitations.
Yes.
I don't think you can have a country, and this is coming from somebody that is a free marketeer by heart and fills all of those necessary boxes. But I don't think that a country can work without a government. I'm not one of those people that's blind to the necessities of government. Yes, we do have a government that wants to run everything but can't run anything. But there are some things that should not be the realm of public-private partnership. I think if you look, for example, at an Eskom situation or take a hospital situation, the idea of tenders, I think, is ludicrous. It's crazy, right? In the private sector, the people that work at the hospital would buy for the hospital, right? It's crazy that you've got this convoluted system that eventually just begs out for corruption. And to me, that's where these. I'm not a huge fan of these public-private partnerships.
I agree with you in that sense. I mean, we are cadre deployment, which in itself is a huge issue as well. So many of these problems are rooted in the governing party.
Yes.
So I think that's ultimately where responsibility lies. And unfortunately, we have enormous apathy in South Africa in terms of the electorate. People are not going to vote because they're so disillusioned. People are bitching and moaning about what's going on and not getting involved to try and change it because they're so disillusioned. Where it's been years and years of this entrenched failure that people have just learned to live with it. And that's not good enough.
Well, on that score, perhaps I'm a little bit more upbeat than you are. There's a surprise.
How so?
Because I've seen the ANC's share of the market drop from 66% down to 46%, which is dramatic.
And could be lower in 2024.
Lower, but the point is that people are voting. People are saying their say by not voting for the ANC.
No, I disagree with you on that. I think by people not voting, it is effectively a vote for the ANC. People need to come out and vote for opposition parties. They need to become involved. I always say choose the opposition party that is least bad.
Yeah,
and vote for them.
I think that a vote not cast hurts the ANC more for a very, very simple reason. For understandable reasons, they are the lodestar for many South Africans, right? And they had a massive goodwill that they could have brought to bear on the electorate. The electorate, in so many ways, is just looking for reasons to vote for the ANC, and the ANC aren't giving it to them. And to expect that person now to go out and support another party, it doesn't even happen in America. You know, I mean, people always get confused. You know, you've seen America being governed by really great presidents, and they go to an election and they'll get 52% of the vote, which is to say that 48% will still back somebody else, even though the president's doing a great job. So, you know, what I'm saying is that in established democracies, people aren't inclined to move away from the party that they identify with. I think that in South Africa, people are moving away from the party that they identify with. Yes, they're not swinging to the other end of the. But, you know, you should have, if you take a two-party system where one candidate is clearly superior to another, the vote should be 90-10, I presume, with only his friends and family voting for the bad candidate. You know, so this is democracy. People find a home and they look for reasons to vote for them. And I think the fact of the matter is that, 20% drop is people doing something. And, some of the opposition parties haven't been wonderful at selling themselves.
So this is what I was about to say, is that a lot of the opposition parties haven't exactly covered themselves in glory either. So I think that leaves the public generally disillusioned with the political class because there are no alternatives. I think civil society is a redeeming feature here. I think that what we've seen in South Africa is a really strong civil society, and we've seen a lot of activism. So outside of the political movements, I think we have incredible success stories with civil society. I think there are so many examples of very capable, very strong civil society organizations that have held government to account. And I think that's where people need to seek refuge, is to support civil society organizations, to get involved, to be active, to donate money, because I think a lot of people are disillusioned with politics.
You see, there's another reason that I'm perhaps quite upbeat, and that is that I think that there's a genie that's out of the bottle in South Africa that can never be put back in. And it's a noisy place where people will get up and say stuff. They may not necessarily, not all of us, but a significant number of people will get up and say what they need to do, start non-government organizations, etc., make noise. And in that environment, it's very, very difficult for authoritarian governments to take root.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, we've seen it, the ANC ticks every box of all of its liberation movement counterparts, right? You sort of have this communist influence. You become an authoritarian government. Eventually, you get the troops to marshal the town. They've tried it; it failed. It's a noisy country. Now you've got social media. I think they've got absolutely no chance of putting that genie back in the bottle, and that's got to be a positive thing for the country, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and again, I think that's because of civil society. I think it's because we have such a deep-rooted constitutional democracy in South Africa. We have the most phenomenal constitution in the world. So I think that any chance of an authoritarian government gaining grip here is highly unlikely. And we saw the pushback during the COVID-19 lockdown, where we had one of the most draconian lockdowns in the world, but we saw so much resistance to it for that reason. And again, I think that in every single instance where there's been a failure of government, it has been civil society organizations that have stepped into the breach and held government to account. There are so many examples. Section 27 on life is said in many, Freedom Under Law, the Helen Suzman Foundation, the Black Sash on social grants, Outer on e-tolls.
Let's not forget the HIV.
So it goes back to the TAC. On HIV and ARVs. So that's that for me, it goes all the way back to the 1990s and the early 2000s on that. And most recently, Gun Free South Africa is challenging government on the police guns that have been used to murder children on the Cape Flats. So we're seeing so many examples here of civil society holding government to account, and that for me is so encouraging.
But we must remain vigilant, because two leaders of major parties in the South African context that already hold some power in some of the metros, in both Gayton McKenzie and Julius Malema, have said that they don't like the Constitution, that they'd want to do away with the Constitution. Now you have Kenny Kuneni saying that these non-government organizations, Robert Mugabe was right to ban them. So I suppose South Africans better be vigilant about where they cast their vote.
There's lots of rhetoric also. In a campaign season, and the elections are a year away. So I think there's going to be lots of rhetoric. I think there's lots of warmongering. I think there's lots of speech that is said to try and create controversy. I think that's what a lot of that is. I'm not sure that would find any... certainly would not pass constitutional muster. It's not that easy. Look what's happening in Israel at the moment, where Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to change the constitution. The country is out on the streets protesting on a regular basis. There is enormous pushback. And I think we would see something very similar in South Africa if there was any attempt to touch the constitution.
Mandy, in closing, do you think that the US ambassador, Ruben Brigadier, is a whistleblower?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure that he's a whistleblower. I think that people are quick to label individuals who speak up whistleblowers. There are also people that are doing their jobs. I think he might argue that he could be a whistleblower because he is exposing something that he believes to be true. I think there needs to be evidence as well, and we need to see that evidence. It's a bit more tricky. I think that's a bit more complicated.
And with your newshound hat on, would an American ambassador make those kind of comments if he didn't have evidence?
I certainly do not believe so. I think that if he's going to go public like that, he must have a very good reason for it.
And he must have had sanction to do it.
I assume so. But at the same time, it gets complicated again. I think that for Clayton Moniela, who is the spokesperson for international relations, to come out and say that he had apologized, he must have got very good reason for that as well. I think these things are murky, as they often want to be. And I think that it's bizarre that we now have a judicial commission of inquiry into all of this, when the president should be able to tell us. It's a yes or no question.
Yeah. And lastly, what do you make of South Africa's stance on the Russia-Ukraine war?
Look, I think that we need to just come out and be open about the fact that we are not neutral. I think that everybody knows it. I think it's evident. I think that Naledi Pandor still harbors ambitions of being the mediator, or perhaps the president does, and trying to broker some kind of peace. Whereas I think that government has shown itself to be pro-Russia and supportive of Russia. I think that this Vladimir Putin arrest warrant issue is going to be tricky to navigate. I think that they've painted themselves into a corner. I think it's going to be hard. And I think that all it's doing is making us unpopular on the world stage.
But at least the ANC is able to pay their salaries, their staff salaries.
Well, touche.
Mandy Wiener, thank you so much for joining us today on the State of the Nation. And thank you to everybody that's joined us today. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're feeling, if you really liked it, then become a member of our supporters club and get some interesting goodies. But Mandy Wiener, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And please go out and buy Mandy's book on whistleblowers. Mandy, once again, great work.
And please donate to the Whistleblower House as well. If you want to support whistleblowers in this country, they really, really do need help.
Well, there you go. Do that. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on the State of the Nation. Thank you.